Welcome to Torah for Women Ministries. This is Judith Garten, and this is a Mountain Moment. We are going to be talking about prepper portions. Instead of being in the kitchen today, I wanted to talk to you about a different topic. This is about what we call ourselves and how people feel about us. Over the years that I have been into preparedness, I have heard it from all sides. From people who condemn preppers as being fear-ridden, extremists, hoarding food, supplies, gasoline, everything you can imagine, and that we're ready to hunker down for Armageddon. We're selfish, self-centered, self-focused, and only focused on being a recluse and avoiding helping others. Then you hear it from people of faith, even large full-time ministries who are shaming preppers into believing it is a sin to be prepared for worse times which might come. And finally, sometimes we hear things from within our own community about we're not prepping enough, or we can't call ourselves real preppers. There are also people like Jim and I who believe it is a form of life and health insurance for ourselves and, if needed, those we love. Whether it is food storage, storing pillows, blankets, whatever you need to store. It is simply a form of life and health insurance, not insurance, insurance. And I want you to pay careful attention to the fact that I said insurance, because having in your pantry those foods and products you and your family are accustomed to having, it ensures you are better able to maintain healthier lifestyles while providing for your family as Yahweh would have you provide, especially in urgent times, which we've seen a lot of in the last couple of years. Now, preparing hasn't changed much in the 30 plus years that I've been involved, and neither has the attitude, the fault finding of people and families who want to be prepared. It's a common theme. It was there when I started preparing. It has been there all throughout. I have even seen, like I said before, actual ministries and pastors preaching from the pulpit, claiming to operate in the Holy Spirit, speak vehemently against preppers as though they are isolationists and that who will take down anyone and everyone who comes near them, claiming they're sinners for their selfishness and lack of compassion. If you've watched our other videos, you know already the examples shared of families that we know or that we ourselves have done, finding ourselves in emergencies needing to rely on that home storage. Let's call it a different name. They needed to rely on their home store. From a biblical perspective, ancient people did the same thing. They relied on storage to sustain themselves. And in fact, there are several examples of when Yahweh warned his people to do exactly what many do now: be prepared. Stop and think for a moment about Moses and the Exodus. Did Yahweh tell them to just go off into the wilderness without food, without clothing? No, in fact, he told them to go with their clothes, their shoes, their cloaks. There might have been some cold nights coming back then in the desert. He told them to take animals, many of which were not just work animals. He told them to take livestock for food. He told them to take their dough and their dough troughs, as well as grains they had. No one thinks of Moses and the Hebrews as being crazy isolationist preppers, do they? Look at some of what they were told. Exodus 12:1. Exodus 12:11. You must be fully dressed for travel, with your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand. Verse 32. Take your flocks and herds. Wow, prepared. Verse 34. The people took their dough before it was leavened, carrying it on their shoulders in kneading bowls wrapped in clothing. How about verses 35 and 36? The Israelites, what did they do? They asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and clothing, and the Lord gave the people such favor in the sight of the Egyptians that they granted their request. You can see here that Abba ensured they were prepared for what they were doing and the trek they would be taking. What can we determine from these verses? Well, to start, they clearly had some meat with them in their flocks and herds. They were able to provide some for their families. The Israelites were commanded to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. To have enough bread for all those people, you can surmise that they took with them the grains or flour to be able to make that bread that they would need to feed the families for at least 7 days. Now fast forward a bit to 150, 200 years ago in the United States of America. Unless you lived in a major city like New York or maybe Philadelphia, goods and services could be few and far between. If you lived out west, you had to wait for the stagecoach to bring the supplies to the stores, and later the trains would ship them. It was tough living. I often praise Yahweh loudly for not having me be born in the pioneer era. It was tough. Truth be told, though, if you weren't what we call a prepper in our modern times, way back then, you and your family wouldn't have made it through the winters in many states. Imagine some of the storms we have had this past winter in different places. Feet of snow. People make it seem as though that's an uncommon event, but there are records of people in journals that I've read through certain pioneer people, and they have experienced things like this in the past. Bitter cold winters, floods, and no car to drive around once the road crews cleared their path, right? There were no road crews back then either, guys, and no cars to run for supplies. What would they do for food, clothing, whatever they needed if they hadn't prepared for the winter? Now just think for a moment how they grew most of their own food on their little homesteads. They had chickens for both eggs and meat, cows and goats for milk and meat. Men went hunting for game, birds, and animals. Women tended gardens for food. Crazy preppers, weren't they? No. They did what they needed to do to provide for their families. In those days, much of what was preserved was done so in a fashion that could be easily done as cheaply as possible. Often meat for winter was salted and dried out. Vegetables and fruits could be dried as well. When canning became available, women canned foods for their pantries, some even fermented foods. People had root cellars too. In fact, not long ago, we took a trip to Harper's Ferry, and I will try to insert some video from one of the root cellars that we saw that was built out of the rocks from just the local area, right there into the hill, across the street from homes and businesses that were being used back in the 17 or 1800s. If someone needed to hit the road back in pioneer times, which is what we're talking about, 1700s, 1800s, they would just grab some dried meat, a bag of hardtack, and mount that horse riding off into the sunset. Or at least that is how all the old westerns portray it, right? That travel could have been so challenging and treacherous. They would need to ration their food for the entire trip and ensure they had enough money or supplies for their return trip as well. Because it was commonplace a few hundred years ago, and just what people did at the time, there was no one there to cry out, "Oh no, you crazy preppers!" They were just doing what God counseled throughout His Word, what they had become accustomed to doing, taking care of their families. They used examples of their own studies of Moses, Noah, and Joseph, and in times of plenty put up for times of little. It was normal. Just stop for a moment. Look. Proverbs 31 woman. We often use it to beat ourselves up. But what did she do? Pick a few of the things out. She ensured her family had clothing and food. She also ensured anyone who worked for her family was fed. She knew how to make clothing and tend crops, a vineyard, in fact. These examples can all be applied to any time period, and yet somehow, somewhere, having a pantry or a root cellar stocked with foods for the winter and supplies has become a stigma. You're suddenly an undesirable in society. These last 18 months or so, since the spring of 2020 especially, until now, as I record this for you, we've seen devastating floods, snowstorms, ice storms, hurricanes, earthquakes, and more affect hundreds of thousands of people. And yes, you are right. If you are thinking there will be some who, no matter how much they had stored or prepared, would still be devastated by what happened in their community. However, those people who are untouched can now help provide for those who have been devastated. You know, in recent months, I've been trying to get people to think and assess more clearly all sorts of different topics, and prepping is a big one. I try to make people stop and reason things out from all perspectives, because often it makes you stop self-judging and helps you stop condemning others. It also will help you have a strong defense when people speak ill of you or your at-home grocery store, because that's what it is. Friends, it's okay to be prepared for emergencies. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When someone is a prepper, it does not mean they are preparing for the end times alone. It means they are preparing for what may come, no matter what that what is. Natural disaster, unemployment, being snowed or iced in, ships stuck in the harbors, not being unloaded, and supplies not getting where they need to go. There's so very many reasons why a family should have a home grocery store. The greatest example of this is the recent situation where Americans faced that epic run on toilet paper. If you had a supply of toilet paper already in your cupboard, you would not have had to rush out and buy it whenever the shelves filled up again. It is time to stop judging yourself by what others claim against you, and time to stop judging others for being equipped for emergencies. Let's take care of our families. Let's build that home grocery. Blessings and shalom.